Hello, in this video I'm going to take a look at struct methods. So I've never used these before, I'm going to give them a go now. So we've already seen how to create a struct now. That's the struct keyword. I need a name for it. Let's just go with person. We've got curly brackets there, and then we have to define the names and types of things that are in it. So I could have a name field of type string. I'm deliberately choosing this because it's potentially more problematic than something that's purely allocated on the stack. And let's have a Boolean field maybe on holiday. So that's going to be a type bool. And I'll put a trailing comma in. So this is what we saw last time. I'm going to check that this works and is formatted correctly before I go any further. Yeah, it's just giving me a warning saying that I'm not creating any persons here, which is fine. So let person1 equal person, and I've got curly brackets again there. It's a really similar syntax to create instances of structs as it is to define the struct type. And here I can say name string : from Bob, and here I'll put on holiday. Let's make that true. So we can't do much with this at the moment apart from print it. I'm just going to print it. So print ln exclamation mark, and yeah, I'll put a semicolon there. We want double quotes, curly brackets, and in there I should be able to write person1 : question mark. This notation actually makes a lot more sense when I see it written here rather than written separately to the type, because if you write it separately it's : question mark, and what is that? But this way it looks like person and a separator and a question mark. So I can pass person1 in, and I know that's not going to work unless I type something which I absolutely can't remember. But if I try to run this, it's going to warn me. So I need this derive debug thing above this type definition to be able to print it like this. Let's try that. Redundant semicolons, you're kidding me. So it says I should remove the semicolon on line 6. Too many semicolons now. Wow. So I understand what's happening here. So after you define the type, you don't need a semicolon. After you define the instance, you do need a semicolon. So, I mean, it's, I don't really understand exactly why that is, but okay, fair enough. I think that's easy enough to remember, really. So let's try just building this again. It doesn't like that. Oh, yeah. I don't need to put that there if I've got this here. That's a fair point. And then we've got some dead code warnings. Actually, I don't really know why. Why is there dead code? Oh, field name and on holiday are never read. Well, that is true. So yeah, now it works. It does actually print out down here. So that's all fine. All right, now what I want to look at is struct methods. Let's make that a bit smaller. And the way I do this is I have an impler block with the same name as the struct I want to add methods to. So I'm guessing if I don't or shouldn't have a semicolon there, then I shouldn't have one here either, because this is some kind of part of a type definition. This actually gives me PTSD, because I had to work with a guy once who wrote Java by writing interfaces, and then he'd write the implementation with the same name as the interface and impler tagged onto it, which was horrendous. Please don't do that. I don't care who recommends it. I know I'm not a world-class Java expert. I shouldn't be handing out advice, but gosh, I just really hated that. Anyway, so now we can define functions in here. So I'm going to write fn. Let's maybe call it something like is on holiday. So this is a function, so I need all the usual stuff. A function is a kind of type definition, so I suppose I don't want a semicolon there. And I want this to return bool. So I need an arrow there and bool, and I just want to return on holiday. So I mean, I could have, I suppose, called that get on holiday or something. It's a getter, basically. And apparently Rust has no special syntax for getters, but I think I'll just go with this. I just want to figure out if this works. Now this takes a parameter. So if you've got a kind of method of a struct, you need a parameter like this, self. And this apparently is a shorthand for self of type reference to self, capital letter. Let's just check if that compiles. Yeah, it doesn't like that. What did I do? You might have meant to use the only available field, cannot find on holiday in this scope. Ah, yeah, because to actually reference on holiday, I have to use self. That's the point of it. Kind of same deal as in Python. It's just self dot. So let's try that. Yeah, and that compiles at least. So instead of writing this, I am allowed to write just self like that, and that also works. It's just a kind of shorthand. And self with a capital S apparently is just an alias for this type, so it should be equivalent to person, which I would think would mean that I could also write that this is of type reference to person. I'm going to run the formatter because I can't remember where I should put spaces here. Yeah, apparently just before the type like that. Okay, so if I run that, does that work? It actually does work, so the documentation isn't lying to me. But a normal thing to write is ampersand self. That's the shortest way of writing it. Now I should be able to call that method. Let's do down here, print line exclamation mark, double quote, and in there, let's have, well, I don't think I can call methods in here. I mean, if I do person1 dot is on holiday, I don't think that will work, but I could try it. In fact, let's just try that and see if it works. I'm pretty sure it won't. So if I try to run this, yeah, it's not going to compile that. I don't know. I'm just going to get rid of that out of there and put it here. Let's say let on holiday equal person1 is on holiday, semicolon, and then I should be able to put on holiday here or not. I don't know. Let's try. Yeah, it works and it says true. So I could write some text here. Bob is on holiday, and that will work. Bob is on holiday, true. So I think that's all pretty straightforward. I wonder if I could get this string. I mean, maybe I could return an immutable reference to it or something. Let's just try. And apparently you can have as many of these impl blocks as you like, but I can't really see why you would want to separate these into multiple blocks normally. I mean, you can have as many as you like for the same struct. So here, let's have fn, and I'll call it get name. And we have the reference to self there. You have an arrow, and I want that to return a reference to a string. And here, let's just put name. Do I have to do anything special here? Like maybe I need a ampersand there. So I really don't know if this will work. Let's try it though. Let's say let name equal person1 dot get name semicolon there, and I'm going to try running this. Yeah, it doesn't like that, and it says I don't find name in this scope. I've done the same thing again. Of course, that's got to be self dot name. Try that. Wow, I think it worked. I'm going to try printing names. So what about if here I put name? Will that work? I don't see why it wouldn't, because we are returning an immutable reference, are we not? So I don't see why that would cause any problems. And Rust does let you do this kind of thing. It doesn't seem to let you return things in a way that's unsafe. Either it's going to compile or it isn't. So it's not like C++ where you can return dangling references or dangling pointers to things that no longer exist because they've gone out of scope. Rust handles this stuff really well. Let's run this. Wow, and it says Bob is on holiday, true. Okay, so that's pretty good. I think there's one more thing that I want to try out here, and that is associated functions, if I've got that right. And that's where you don't have a self, so it's kind of like a static method, basically, I suppose. And one use of those would be to construct a new person, so kind of like a factory method. So let's create a function here, which I'll call new. And that doesn't have a special meaning in Rust, as far as I understand. And that's not going to have a self. And it's going to return, well, it is going to return person, but I ought to be able to use self in there, which apparently in this context is a synonym for person. Let's put the curly brackets in. And how would I return a new person? Well, I can just do self, right? Except I think I've got to define name and on holiday. So wouldn't that be curly brackets here? Name, what's the name going to be? Let's say string : from, and just make the name unknown. And then I can say is on holiday, and that can be false by default. So this ought to just return a new instance of person here, I think. Let's see if that works. So how can I use that? I'll maybe put a blank line under this stuff, and we'll have let person2 equal. And the way we call this is the syntax that we've already been using with string, : syntax. And that's used in several different languages for sure. So I'm going to say here person : new, and then let's try to print it. So I should be able to print it with this syntax. Since I've got debug mode on there, let's try person2 and we'll see what we've got. All right, so I'm just going to format this actually. I think this hasn't done any major reformatting. It seems fine. Okay, so cargo run, will this work? Okay, is on holiday false? Help, I've just given it the wrong name. Well, it's actually quite reassuring that most of the errors I'm getting are I'm just forgetting basic things or misnaming something or whatever. So that should be on holiday false. We'll try that. And it works. Wow. That's actually pretty amazing. I suppose it isn't, but I don't know, I'm impressed. Let's just see how much of this I can get. On the page here, there's not all that much code here. So as usual, I'm going to write this up and also put a video as well on blog.caveofprogramming.com. So do have a look at that. And there'll be a link to the code on GitHub as well, and a kind of succinct explanation of it. So I was listening to a video by a guy called Richard Feldman. Thanks for sending me that video, Jeremy. It was good. The video was called something like the re-emergence of procedural programming or something. And he was making the interesting point that in the 90s there was huge optimism about object orientation. And if you went into a bookshop and you looked at the programming section, there'd be a huge number of books about object orientation. I remember that because I was learning to program at the time, and I spent a huge amount of money on books because the internet was barely up and running at that stage. And the point that he was making was that a lot of people now feel more than 25 years later, that object orientation didn't really live up to its promises. It solves some problems and it doesn't really fix other problems, and it introduces new problems. And this is something that really strikes a chord with me. I think, as Feldman was saying, there are good aspects to object orientation and there are aspects that, yes, they can be very useful, but I don't really like them. And the biggest good aspect is certainly being able to bundle data with methods, which we can do here in Rust. And actually there's always a way to do that in every programming language. It's a question of how elegant that ends up being, and I would say this was pretty elegant. What I'm not so keen on in object orientation really is inheritance. It's always felt like a bit of a hollow promise to me, and it does introduce new problems of its own, as Feldman goes into a bit in that video. So I'm pretty happy with the fact that apparently from a strict point of view, Rust is not an object-oriented language, but it does have this nice syntax for bundling data with methods, which to me is the good bit of object orientation anyway. And honestly, I think a lot of the hype around object orientation was just hype. That's a very arguable point, of course. These days I'm not a working programmer. Well, I just program for my courses and for fun and to get stuff done myself. And I'm sure there are people who are professionals who would stridently disagree with me, but that's my take on it. And I think Richard Feldman makes some really good points in that video. So anyway, in summary, I'm still really optimistic about Rust. I really like it so far. I can see why people are saying it's maybe the best loved language. Do check out blog.caveofprogramming.com. And next time we're going to look at whatever's next in the documentation. I double checked and it's actually not the Rust book that I'm going through. It's just the normal Rust documentation, which I've already forgotten the name of. But we'll have a look at whatever's next in that in the next video. So until next time, happy coding.